Hi and welcome back to a new video. Today we have the honor to test this ASUS RTX 5090 Matrix, probably one of the most exclusive, most special graphics cards that you can currently buy, if you can buy one. The pricing is about 4,000 euros, it's limited to 1,000 pieces, and it has very special features, such as liquid metal on the GPU, a huge air cooler, dual power inputs for extra power delivery, a total of 800 watt TDP. All this should make this card special and very interesting. Thermal Grizzly Duronaut is our new high-end thermal paste and the successor of Cryonaut. It's even better performing, it is much easier to apply, it is cheaper, and it's much more durable. That's where the name comes from. Especially if you're now maybe considering to buy a new PC, then I would highly recommend that you're looking into this thermal paste. So let's continue with this video. I'm absolutely hyped and I want to see how the card looks like in retail condition because we saw it at Gamescom obviously, but now first time for me to be able to unbox this and see how the card looks like. So that's the first thing we will do. The design is special and it's trying to mix the legacy of the 9800 GT Matrix, so the first Matrix, and a more recent 5090 Astral. The packaging design kind of reminds me of the previous Matrix, but at the same time it's also trying to just replicate the product that's inside. That's already looking quite nice from the outside. And ASUS is also celebrating 30 years of GPU business with this card, which you can find on various spots. Now there are some magnets on the side here, and opening the magnets you should be able to slide this out and then see the card. The design is special, you have to like the black and red color and also the shape. Yeah, I can't deny I saw some funny comments about it, but it is a super nice looking card. And now you can see the card in all of its beauty, and you can see 3 fans in front, and same as Astral, there is a 4th fan on the back. Underneath the card we can find some accessories. We have a GPU stand right here, and then this is actually quite cool. It's like a card game. That's actually quite neat, I like that. And in this accessory box on the left we have things like the extra power connector which we will need for the BTF. This is how the adapter looks like, and it just goes into the bottom of the card for the extra 200 watts power delivery. You can still use the card with just the 12 volt high power if you want to, but to use the full capability of the card you will need a BTF board like this where the card can slot into, but if you just use the 12 volt high power connector from top, it will still draw the 600 watts from there. But I think you can also use it the opposite way, so you just use the BTF connector without the 12 volt high power, and in this state it should also be 600 watts only if I just understood it correctly, and then you could leave on this tiny cap that goes onto the 12 volt high power. So just the attention to detail they paid with, for example, this tiny cap is really outstanding. The design is absolutely awesome. And while we're looking at the backside, I want to address the fan thing quickly, because this is, I mean, it's a 5080 Astral, but 5080, 5090 have the same blade design right here, which I strongly disliked just because it was very loud. But you can see they fully changed the blade design. So the blade design on the Matrix has nothing in common with the Astral, and I hope this fixed the noise level issue. The cooler also has some quite interesting design choices. For example, if you pay attention to those small slots right here. Typically you would design an air cooler that is closed on the front. So you're closing off and the fans are pushing the air through. But here you can see this area, or all these tiny slots right here, they are also open to the front. So you can see the heatsink to a certain degree, which also means that the air will be pushed through, and some of the air can also go back through this. Not much, but that's just something interesting that I noticed. And also ASUS noted that the prototype you saw at Gamescom, or at least one of them, had a full copper heatsink. But the retail version here is just aluminum heatsink, which makes sense because they said that the advantage of copper fans is quite small, but has a big disadvantage in terms of weight and also especially the price. That is something that's kind of common knowledge, I would say, in the air cooling industry. You rarely see heatsinks with copper fins because it drastically increases prices, but it doesn't really enhance the cooling performance a lot. Quite common for our G cards or Strix cards, you could add 2 fans or connect them to the card directly, and there in the corner is also a BIOS switch. And talking about the BIOS, there's also some quite interesting and recent development that the BIOS of the Matrix is already available for download at Tech Power Up. And people already tried to flash it to other cards, which works, for example, on an ASUS Master. But it doesn't work on an Astral, which is honestly not surprising to me because it's in ASUS' interest that it wouldn't work. It's also in NVIDIA's interest that it wouldn't work. And I think it's kind of an open secret that the limitation of the Matrix when it comes to availability and quantity is not only an ASUS choice, but also an NVIDIA choice. The fact that this card is allowed to run at 800 watts is also because of NVIDIA and the negotiation between ASUS and NVIDIA that they are allowed to make this kind of very special card with a more open TDP, but it is limited in quantity. And that's also, at least to me, it would make sense that they would try that the BIOS does not work on other cards. I'm not quite sure if it's only the fan controller limitation or a different thing that comes into play. But you have to keep in mind, if you flash it, for example, to an ASUS Master, you're running this just purely over the 12-volt high power connector, and you would always run it out of spec and risking melting and all these kind of things. While on the Matrix, this should be safe in theory because you're just supplying the additional power through a secondary connector. But we want to mount the card now, and for this we need the adapter. It is a quite special design with the round part on the side, but honestly, in reality, just having this card in front of you, it looks very, very cool. Also with the Republics of Gamers logo, just how it started to initiate with the LED running from left to right, that looked very cool. Also this infinity mirror that you have on the right with the Matrix logo inside, and then this big aluminum frame surrounding everything. Quality, just the way it looks like, I'm impressed. I'm just running my first test right now, and I can already say that the coil whine is present, but it's on a very low to mid level, so it's acceptable. The card has been running about 1 hour under full load, so we can investigate the load scenario, where you can see that the GPU clock is constantly above 3000 MHz. And that is possible because of the open power target, or more open than stock. But instead of the 800 watts, we're seeing something that is a bit lower. Typically, I saw between 680 to about 720 or 730 watts that the card is pulling in this scenario. And you can also see that at power consumption, usually the card is running with about 90% of the possible TDP. The fan speed of the card is about 1600 RPM. Similar as the Astral, the Matrix also has additional monitoring features on the PCB. That's also important because those are on PCB temperature sensors or resistors, and they report a bit lower temperature than the IC temperature, as you can see on the memory, about 67 degrees Celsius, while GPU-C is reporting about 10 degrees Celsius higher. And my favorite feature again is the per pin sensing, and you can see current between 5 to 6 amps, which is lower than what you typically see on an Astral, simply because you're dividing the current also over the motherboard. As I pointed out earlier, the noise level is very important for me, and also the improvement that I was expecting over the Astral, and ASUS absolutely delivered. So on this card, with the P mode, it's pulling about 720 watts in this scenario. And the noise level is at about 46 decibels, which is an improvement of about 6 decibels over the 5090 Astral in P mode. And at the same time, you have to keep in mind that the Matrix is pulling 120 watts more, roughly, but it is at a lower noise level, at a significantly lower noise level. And that is something I absolutely appreciate. What I also appreciate is the Q mode. The card is currently running in, like next to me, and you can hardly hear it. It is absolutely quiet in the Q mode and very enjoyable. The only downside though in the Q mode is that you're changing the power limit. In the P mode, you're running the up to 800 watts, but in the Q mode, as it's running next to me, it is limited to 600 watts. But the 600 watts allows the Q mode to go down to 36 decibels, which is just very, very quiet and enjoyable. In the Q mode, the core clock is slightly reduced by 150 to 200 megahertz, and also the fans are spinning slower. That's why it's more quiet with about 1400 RPM, and you can see board power draw 600 watts. And now we're getting finally to the point that I think everybody is interested in, and that's the performance. Already in Q mode, the RTX 5090 Matrix beats the Founders Edition by about 4 FPS. And what I honestly did not expect is that the Matrix in P mode can even beat the RTX Pro 6000. It only beats it by 0.5 FPS, but faster is faster. This means that the RTX 5090 Matrix is the fastest consumer graphics card that you can buy. And I even factored in the RTX Pro 6000 as a consumer graphics card, which it actually isn't. Obviously, the RTX 5090 Matrix is fully built for overclocking, and we have to utilize all the features that it has. So we can make full use of the 800 watts TDP and also other features that we didn't touch yet in GPU Tweak 3. In Speedway stock, we had 158 FPS, and that's what we want to improve. Similar to other 50 series cards, it's quite simple to get it very close to the limit without fine-tuning. So you just pull GPU voltage to 100%. This alone will allow the card to clock slightly higher. Then you try to maximize the GPU boost clock, and in my case it was plus 160 MHz, that is like stable, and then just push the memory clock to the max. And with these settings, I'm rerunning 3D Mark Speedway, and then we can see what kind of result we're seeing at the end with exact these settings. And with this, we're getting a final score of about 163 FPS. However, in gaming, the 5090 Matrix cannot always beat the RTX Pro 6000. For example, here in Star Wars Outlaws, where it achieves 98 FPS on average. So that's slightly behind, but it also consumes 16% more power. But then, for example, in Assassin's Creed Mirage, the 5090 Matrix is slightly faster with 150 FPS on average, but again, also much higher power draw, 18% more power than the Pro 6000. Things get even worse if we compare the 5090 Matrix with a normal 5090 like the Founders Edition. In that scenario, for me, the Matrix always consumed about 26% more power, while it was only about 10% faster. During my review, I also noticed that this retail version of the 5090 Matrix is slightly different to the version that was shown during Gamescom. For example, if you pay closer attention to the fans, these are 9-blade fans, whereas the version that was shown at Gamescom had 7 blades. There is no general rule if 9 or 7 blades is better, it just depends how you spec your fan, how you create the fan blade design in detail. But for whatever reason, they changed it, and they also changed the design of the rear fan. The rear fan on the first version that was shown had some kind of like small stripes on here, and this one is also much more inclined than the version that was shown during Gamescom. And now I'm curious if there is things inside that may be different, or just in general, how the card looks inside. So we will have to open this baby. I have to be extra careful this time because I have to return this card, and ideally it should not be damaged. On the backplate, which is made from aluminum, we have several screws that we will have to remove first. The backplate features dedicated thermal pads that make contact with the GPU area, memory, and also, as you can see on top here, with 12-volt high power. Now this is a quite dangerous step because on this specific cooler design we have a lot of contact patches for like memory and VRMs and everything that make contact with the cooler side with thermal pads. At the same time, this card should use liquid metal. And if ASUS is using the same principle as with like 5090 Matrix, they will probably have some sticky sealing ring around the GPU, and that probably means, again, like with the 4090 Matrix, I have to put a lot of stress and force onto the PCB to release it, and that always has a certain risk of damaging the PCB or like the GPU, which I absolutely want to avoid. Honestly, I'm not 100% sure yet what to think of this. That also explains why it was a bit easier than last time to remove it, because there is not a sticky layer. It's just thermal paste that is applied around the GPU as something like a seal. And then you can see the opposite side. And also a lot of liquid metal. You can see it had contact definitely on the GPU and also on the cooler, and also a lot of liquid metal that squeezed out to the side. You know, the thing is, with a 4,000 euro card, I'm kind of expecting perfection, which is something I have experienced so far. If you just go from the packaging, from the design, from the cooler, fan, noise level, even the coil whine was pretty close to perfection, and then also the performance, which was great. So all of this is awesome. And also the temperatures looked all right. But then if I'm seeing this, you know, everybody, like every enthusiast that applied liquid metal so far, would not consider this perfection. That's just simply how I feel like looking at this. Even though the temperatures were fine, this is not what I would consider perfection. And I don't know, it's hard to argue, you know, if the temperatures looked all right, the liquid metal application probably was all right. I'm also seeing a weird pattern on the GPU and the cooler, which is something I did not see before. So I'm not quite sure how they applied the liquid metal. Maybe this is a new method I'm not aware of yet, but just the frame that is sealing off the liquid metal from the environment, just using paste. Yeah, that's not what I would consider perfection. So this could have been done better for sure. And that's something I will have to look into, like probably a follow-up video where I'm investigating this further, look how this was done, and also if we reapply, if the temperature will change or not. Just from an objective standpoint, this is a card you can't recommend. With above 4,000 euros, this is at least 60% more expensive than an average 5090 that you can get here in stock. For 10% more performance and also at the same time 30% more power draw. So all those factors, just you can't recommend the card. But you know, subjectively, it's a bit different. And yeah, I've been an enthusiast all along, also way before YouTube, and I'm exactly the type of person who would buy this because it's very special. It looks nice, it feels nice, the design is awesome. Cooling, technical features, I can't deny that I'm a victim of myself, of just liking these kind of things, and I can't blame anyone for wanting to buy this, even though there's maybe the thing with liquid metal that's not perfect, but the card is pretty close to perfection, and just the fact that it's probably the fastest consumer card that you can currently get with this special design is something I would personally definitely get. From my perspective, there's also the missed opportunity of a special edition motherboard to go along with the Matrix. You know, you have to use BTF by ASUS, which means that you can only mount it horizontally, you can't mount it vertically, and you're already spending 4,000 euros, and you're getting something that is a special black and red design, and I would have loved to see a special, I don't know, Matrix motherboard or something just to go with the card to match the color theme and everything. If you're already tied to something very specific like the BTF, that would have been cool. That would have been the cherry on the cake, but so far I still love the card for what it is. It's still, I'm not sure about the liquid metal application. That's something I want to investigate, and also maybe looking into if you can bridge the finger so you're not forced to use BTF. That's something I want to check out. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I will definitely have a follow-up video coming about this card. Hope you enjoyed it. See you next time. Bye-bye.